the West Bank. Joining voluntarily protective presence for Palestinians, shepherding families facing violent attacks by Israeli settlers and soldiers. As a former 10-year co-director of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, a lifelong activist, and a student of the embodiment of courage, Katie believes in applying the wisdom of our faith traditions in order to build solidarity, deepen compassion, and meet the suffering of the present moment. Katie, thank you so much. The floor is open. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I thank you, Annie, for sharing that selection. Thank you, Adriana, for continuing to hold this space. I think that the images that we're seeing on screens of bleeding babies and children are touching us very deeply, and that's why we're here, most of us, I would imagine. So it's interesting. We seem to be permeable somehow. Before we begin, I would love to first of all, thank you so much for taking some time out to be with me on this evening, wherever you are in the world, and hear a little bit about my teeny tiny slice of experience with protective presence in the West Bank in Palestine. I just got back like a week and a half ago to the US, and I would love to understand a little bit more before we start about what you're most interested in hearing from me tonight, if given two options. So are you more interested in hearing about what protective presence entailed for me, what I have witnessed, what I saw, what I experienced, what it is, kind of a definition, that kind of stuff? Or are you more interested in hearing about some of my motivations and what prompted me to go to the West Bank to serve in protective presence? So Annie had offered kindly to put a poll up so that you can vote, and then we can all see the group results. I think maybe the poll disappeared that you had prepared. I see from your face. Okay. Would you like to put the poll back together again, or do you want to have just people write in the chat? Okay, we're going to do the poll. The poll is nice because then you can really see what everybody wants. Please, if you are able to, once the poll is ready, please register your preference. Oh my gosh. Hi, Eddie. It's so good to see some faces of friends and loved ones on this call. Thank you for coming.
We are having some already opinions about it, and most of them are about hearing from both perspectives.
I'm not able to get it out. I have the poll, but I can't get it to come to your screen. So I'm not sure what that's about. So maybe people can just put it in the chat. I'm sorry.
Thanks for trying. I appreciate it. Yeah, if folks have a strong opinion and want to put it in the chat, that's fine. Otherwise, I can do my best to balance both, and that's what I've really prepared. But just in case there was, a strong feeling in the room, I wanted to meet everybody where you're at this evening. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of both. I'm seeing some protective presence and witnessing. Protective presence, witnessing. Okay, so maybe both, but like slightly more emphasis on the what of the protective presencing. Sweet. Okay, I will share my screen And here we go. Is the screen sharing working for folks? Thumbs up? Okay, great. So tonight is about protective presence in Masefer Yatta, West Bank in Palestine. Tonight's barnamij, which is a word, one of the like 40 words in Arabic that we learned while we were there. And I apologize because my pronunciation is terrible, but it means like tonight's program. So a little bit about getting there and introducing myself. Who am I? Why did I decide to go? Then what is protective presence? Some brief definitions and context. What did I see Palestinians experiencing? A summary and some stories. What did I myself personally experience? Some reflections, and was it worth it to me? And then hopefully some Q&A. If you have questions, thank you in advance for your generous and generative questions. And please, write them down throughout the presentation, or I don't know if you can chat them directly to the hosts, if you all want to advise about that. Great.
Yeah, I think it's okay if people have questions, just put it in the chat or to just send it to us if you'd prefer. Either way, Annie or Adriana.
Thank you. Okay, so getting there, a short introduction of me. Who am I and why did I feel moved to go? I come from some gorgeous and joyful people, some of whom are on this call. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. On the upper left, you'll see my dad reading me a story, which is one of our favorite activities when I was little. And on the upper right, that's my Oma, my grandmother on my mom's side, and my mom. And at the bottom, that's me and my partner, Wei Li, who's also here. Hi, babe. We actually went to do protective presence together. So I was very fortunate to have such an amazing partner in this. And as well as coming from very joyful ancestry, I also come from ancestry that is familiar with atrocity. So these are my opa's, my grandfather's concentration camp papers. As a Jewish person in Austria, he managed to survive 4 different death camps of the Nazis, including Dachau, Auschwitz, and Buchenwald. I think I pronounced that wrong, Buchenwald. I don't know. My German pronunciation is also bad, as well as Arabic. But long story short, he managed to survive. A lot of his family was killed. And there is some amount of living ancestry and familiarity with anti-Semitism and intergenerational anti-Semitism that lives in me, that I'm familiar with. My mom actually gifted me with copies of these papers as we embarked for Israel and Palestine, and also a photograph of a young ancestor of mine who was killed at around age 8 or 9 by a bomb because he was wearing a Jewish yellow star and was denied access to a bomb shelter. So there's a lot of intergenerational triggering that's been happening for me. On my dad's side, there is also familiarity with atrocity, but resistance too. My dad in this photo from Cornell University in 1969 is literally in the middle of a Black student uprising, armed, where students took over one of the university buildings to demand the creation of a Black Studies department. And my dad was actually the peace negotiator between the armed students and the administration. It was a really proud moment for him to prevent that standoff from turning into a bloodbath. And nobody was killed in this encounter. And eventually Cornell got a Black Studies department. And although my Oma and my mom might look like, some genteel ladies, very innocent, these are also 2 civil disobedience practitioners and scofflaws who have had their time of breaking the law for good reasons. My Oma during World War II was also living in Vienna, Austria, and she as a non-Jewish person at the time, smuggled Jewish babies from the underground into above ground families where they could be raised in relative safety. And she converted to Judaism when she married my opa after the war. And my mom is a lifelong fighter for reproductive justice and helped people to get abortions before abortions were legal in this country. So I come from a proud and long line of solidarity. And this makes me willing and able to take steps towards risk and solidarity. So I want to talk tonight a little bit about what makes us willing and able to take on risk. Part of it is my own power and privilege. I have a positionality that allows me to entertain the idea of doing something like protective presence. I had a lot of resources, a lot of identity-based privileges, and I tried to put them to good use. So I love this quote by Toni Morrison. I tell my students, when you get these jobs that you've been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. This is not just a grab bag candy game. So power and privilege makes us more able to take risks sometimes. And solidarity, a wish for solidarity, solidarity as tenderness, the tenderness of the people of the world, as Ernesto Cardenal said, I think makes us more willing to take on risks in service of solidarity. For me personally, and I won't go too deep into this because people wanted to get to the protective presence part, but I do want to really honor that I was so humbled by watching videos of doctors in Gaza who decided to stay with their patients instead of evacuating to save their own lives. Many of you might have seen this video. It has like millions of views online, and it's doctors singing in a hospital in the north and refusing to evacuate after the first orders of evacuation to the south that Israel gave in October. But as I was looking for footage to, and I'm not going to play it because we don't have enough time, I'm sorry, but you should go look it up. It's really incredible. As I was looking for footage or images to illustrate this, I was completely sidetracked by other articles about other doctors in Gaza who've been killed in Israeli airstrikes or shootings over the years. And so I just want to say the names of a couple of those people. Razan al-Najjar was a volunteer medic who was shot and killed at 20 years old in 2018, 1 month after being interviewed by the New York Times about the challenges of being a female medic. She was killed while trying to help an injured protester at the Israel-Gaza border fence. Sorry. This is a photo of her. And in the interview with the New York Times, she was saying, we have one goal: to save lives and evacuate people. Yeah. I was also humbled by Dr. Ayman Abu al-Auf, please pardon my pronunciation, head of internal medicine at Al-Shifa Hospital, killed in his home by an Israeli airstrike in 2021, along with 12 members of his extended family. They included his mother and father, his wife, Reem, their 17-year-old son, Tawfiq, and 12-year-old daughter, Talla. So that's him, Dr. Abu al-Auf, and his daughter, Talla, and his son, Tawfiq, who were all killed in an airstrike well before October 7th. Actually, like during the pandemic. So that's why, during the height of coronavirus, that's why you see them masked. So I saw the doctors, I saw journalists like Bizan and Motaz and Plestia, and I saw also Israeli mothers like Michal Halev, this mother who lost her son to Hamas on October 7th, and still issued a plea for no vengeance in her name. Please stop the wars, stop the massacres in Gaza, please stop the killing. And she was really able to connect with the suffering of Palestinian mothers in Gaza as well. So I feel really inspired by her, and just want to also say her name and her son's name, Laor. And again, I'm not going to play it just because of time, but I really encourage you, if you want to take notes or look up some of these things. They're very moving to me. Also, as a Buddhist, my motivations for going to the West Bank for protective presence are informed by the teachings of the Buddha and the many traditions of diasporic Asian Buddhists who have kept this wisdom alive for millennia. And this line from the Metta Sutta, even as a mother at the risk of her life watches over and protects her only child, so with a boundless mind should one cherish all beings. And these words are deep and aspirational, and I really want to live my life asking what these words look like when applied, you know? So all of that is what brought me to the West Bank and protective presence. Those were my motivations. And I'm going to give you a little taste tonight about what I experienced and encountered while I was there doing protective presence. This gives you an introductory idea. There were a lot of guns. But what is protective presence? So protective presence is a nonviolent attempt to deter, de-escalate, and document sustained violence against a vulnerable group. Our goal, Whaley and I, while we were there, was that no more Palestinian families in Masefer Yatta would be severely injured in our presence or forced to flee their homes, which we're happy to say was achieved. Before we arrived, I believe somewhere between 16 and 22 families fled for their lives just from this one small rural area. The tools we used for protective presence are our bodies, our citizenship privilege, which goes back to the power and privilege quote from Toni Morrison, and our cameras. Okay. So some of the encounters were pretty calm, like that first one that you just saw with me talking to Israeli soldiers. But others were pretty escalated. So you'll see one of our fellow activists, who is actually Israeli himself, was being approached and pushed back by an armed person. You can hear him. There's like a big click where the settler soldier cocks his rifle. And then he was pushing all of us back into a car and continued to point the gun at us to try to get us to leave. Even though we were on Palestinian land and had legally a right to film and be there. Sorry. Okay. So, great. So our three main roles as protective presence were, in the daytime, to accompany shepherds and farmers during their daily life and work, in order, again, to deter, de-escalate, and document settler or army harassment and violence. At night, we would stay overnight with Palestinian families who requested activist presence. And in rapid response, which usually happened during the day, we would travel to sites of settler harassment and violence. And we would always be in groups of 3, 2 or 3, sometimes even more, for protection for ourselves and for the people who requested us to come. And I want to just emphasize here the principle of only coming when called. So that was underlying this entire experience of protective presence. And I think for me, is a really deep guiding principle of any solidarity work is to only come when called, not to impose ourselves, but only to come when invited. Okay. So where were we invited? Where is Musafer Yatta? Our work took place in rural parts of Area C, which is the part of the West Bank that is under Israeli military and civilian rule. Depending on the source you look at, you might see between 500 to 700,000 Israeli citizens or settlers who are living on private Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. So you can see here at the bottom, I've circled this little area, which is roughly Musafer Yatta, where we were. And this is a little bit of what it looks like. Very rural, beautiful olive groves, lots of sheep and goats. So we're out there accompanying shepherds. Not too bad for a day-to-day activity. All right, so what are Palestinians in Musafer Yatta experiencing? Again, the vast majority of families that we stayed with who invited us were shepherds. So if you're a shepherd in this part of the West Bank, one thing you really need at this time of year is to graze your flock on the green land, the green grass that's been made green by the rains. If you don't have access to that land, then you're reduced to buying feed and feeding that to your flock, which is much more expensive. So unfortunately, since October 7th, there's been a huge escalation in settler violence attacking shepherds and preventing them, pushing them back from lands that rightfully are theirs to graze upon. So that was a big part of our work, to accompany shepherds to ensure that their flocks could graze and that they could plow their fields to plant the feed and grass and food that they needed to plant. This is a quote from a Palestinian living in the West Bank, Sami Sosa, who said, "Ben Gvir arms the settlers with automatic weapons and tells them to do what they like. And where are we supposed to go?" So Sami lives in the northern West Bank, so not where we were, and was interviewed for the New York Times Magazine, which just came out recently. And the Ben Gvir he's talking about is Israel's Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben Gvir, who himself is a settler who lives in a suburb of Hebron. So when we say the Israeli minister is handing out rifles, automatic weapons to people, this is a little bit of what that looks like during protective presence. Every day you're going to see somebody who's dressed up in army gear, and it's very unclear whether they're actually on duty as a soldier or whether they are a settler and off duty or not even enlisted in the army currently, but they've just been given a gun and basically carte blanche to do whatever they want with it. When folks roll through in the, like, army people come through, Israeli army soldiers, they often come in pretty big groups, like 3, 4, 5, and we believe, and the people who've been on the ground much longer than I was believe, that usually it's a combination of on duty and off duty, like on duty soldiers and settlers who just decided to tag along for the day. So that really aggressive person who pushed us back into the car with a gun, we think that he was a settler, but the term settler soldier we basically use because it's like kind of impossible to functionally tell the difference when they're trying to push you off of land. So that was just a little peek at some soldiers who approached us and wanted to know what we were doing. Okay, so I wanted to list, this is the summary part of what we witnessed, because if I were to go into stories for each item, it would take way too long. So I'm going to summarize 18 types of violence that we witnessed against Palestinians. And then we'll go into just a few examples in more depth. So if you're Palestinian in Musafariyata, you could experience being prevented from grazing by the settlers or the army, or both. You could experience settlers grazing on your land, so bringing their sheep and their goats to eat your grass. You could be tear gassed when you're trying to plow your land. And by the way, all of these things are things we either witnessed directly in real time, or we saw the after effects. So all of these we made some kind of contact with while we were there. You might be fearful of your kids walking to school. You could experience encroaching settlements that prevent you and your community from grazing altogether. That's the case in a community called Al Khair, which we'll talk about later. You will almost certainly experience threats at gunpoint. You might be shot without consequences. There was a 17-year-old boy who was shot in the stomach by a settler from the next door military outpost. He just arrived home from the hospital the first day that we entered the field. And the settler continues to live next door with no consequences. You could experience random abductions and beatings at army outposts. Your house could be demolished without warning. Settler soldiers could destroy or block the roads that you rely on to get in and out of your village. The settler soldiers can set up random checkpoints wherever they want, kind of like speed traps and an excuse to search your car. Settlers could set fire to your schools and houses, and that was part of the reason that people were fleeing and abandoning their houses, and we saw abandoned houses while we were there. And settlers could rip out your olive trees. I showed a photo of that a couple slides ago. Settlers could be smashing your solar panels, throwing stones at your house, letting their dogs bite your dogs, flying drones over your home and your yard, or pouring diesel oil into your well. This is something that happened while we were there. Poisoning sheep or poisoning wells, destroying water, cutting off water supply or severely restricting it is pretty common. We weren't present to witness the demolition of this house, but if you watched the documentary, The Law and the Prophet, that we offered in the materials for today, then you may have seen some more about this, or maybe you know from other kinds of experience or direct experience, but yeah, this is a pretty common occurrence, unfortunately. So a short disclaimer, you're not going to see a lot of faces of the Palestinian people that we were with, and that's on purpose. It's not so that I decenter them from the story, but it's to protect their identities. I'm still in a learning process of how to share these stories in a respectful way that also doesn't provoke further retaliation or further endanger people. But I shared these folks with their permission. And this is on the left, Rafiq, and on the right, Tawfiq, two people that we stayed with in an awesome small village. They're two brothers, and their families live kind of side by side. Rafiq is this absolutely radiant person who every night that we stayed with him wanted to practice learning English vocabulary and teaching us some Arabic. And Tawfiq played the flute really beautifully, and we danced together. It was a great time. But one night, instead of practicing individual English words like sunburn and pillow and tea kettle, Rafiq wanted to learn how to say a full sentence. So we used Google Translate And what we came up with together was this sentence: he imposes his crops on my land. And I find this really chilling because, so what Rafiq is referring to is a local settler who came and planted seeds on Rafiq's land. And it might have been the same man from the same settlement who also months ago came and held a gun to Rafiq's head and said, if you and your family don't get out within the next 24 hours, I'm going to come back and kill everybody. So to me, the act of coming to, excuse me, plant seeds on someone's land that you're actively threatening, it reminds me of burning a cross on someone's lawn, you know? Very KKK vibes to me. And I imagine the settler will want to come back and defend the seeds that he planted. A couple more videos. So on the left, this is actually Rafiq and Tawfiq's land. The very green area is where they've planted on the left. And this was a day when we saw the settlers grazing their sheep on the Palestinians' land. So we went and very gently asked them to not do that. And the result on the right, I'll just play this again, is that within like 45 minutes, they had come down the mountain with this big excavation machine, and they used huge boulders to block the two last remaining roads connecting these homes to the main road. So I just include this to give an example of retaliation. Luckily, as activists, everybody was very clear that we are taking our directives from the Palestinian families themselves. They know best what kinds of risks might be worthwhile to take and which ones are not. So we're not there to impose our views. We're there to support them in what they want to do. So the Arabic-speaking activist among us had already conferred with the family, agreed to go and for us as activists to go and ask the settlers to stop grazing on the Palestinian lands, because again, it's literally taking food out of the mouths of their flock. Like, they planted that seed, they are cultivating it with water that is not easy to come by. So it's actively stealing a precious resource. So when we went to very gently remind them and ask them not to do that, almost instantly there was this pretty significant retaliation. And that just creates an atmosphere of a lot of fear, as you can imagine. Any kind of pushback that you make could be met with a pretty serious escalation or retaliation. I mentioned a little earlier al Khair, which is a Bedouin Palestinian village that we stayed at for a couple of nights. Actually, the people of al Khair, who are also traditionally shepherds, as of recently can no longer graze anywhere. They are blocked in almost completely by an encroaching settlement that's like really nice houses and a really nice playground. I mean, the contrast is stunning. You can kind of see on this map here, and I really recommend, I'll drop the link in the chat, I recommend checking out this entire article. It's written by one of the people who lives in al Khair, Alda. And so the land grab is so complete in this case that the way of life of shepherding has basically been foreclosed for the people of al Khair. Lands around them continue to be confiscated and protected, again, at gunpoint by settlers. This is one of the really beautiful murals, many very beautiful murals that has been painted at al Khair. Another article I recommend if you want to see more about what protective presence is looking like in this particular part of the West Bank right now is an article by Anna Lipman, who was one of the activists that actually started on the same day that we did, and really cool person from Toronto. And I just very much appreciate the way that Anna wrote this article about her experience doing protective presence. And she's been back twice. She's done this twice. So again, I'll put the link in the chat, but I wanted to shout it out and recommend that you look it up if you're interested in just some more details, more color about protective presence. Okay, I need a deep breath. I need a second. Whew, okay.
And we have a bell, maybe? Would you like a bell?
Sure. Bell, time check. Okay,
Yeah.
we're doing okay.
We can just breathe together. We just shared a lot, and you just shared a lot. So let's breathe. Yeah, we can just come back to our bodies and settle back in. I know we're all feeling a lot right now. I mean, I'm guessing. I know I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. This is why we need Sangha. I need to be helped back into my body sometimes. I appreciate it. Okay, so I have shared a little bit about what I saw Palestinians experiencing in the West Bank in Masafer Yatta, and I want to tell you a tiny bit about what I experienced too. You saw in some earlier videos that, that was the first time that I had like a loaded gun pointed in my face by an angry person. And we experienced not quite so intense confrontations, but some other confrontations with armed people. So this was a day when we were helping a shepherd to graze right near his home. And all of a sudden, out of the olive trees appears a black dog that I didn't recognize. And I was like, whoa, this dog looks, one, really well fed, and two, I don't know where it came from. And then soon behind came this settler. Excuse us. So you can see him really using his body to try to physically push us and intimidate us to leave this land. That we're going, okay? We're okay. We're going, okay? We're going. So just to emphasize one more time, the purpose of protective presence is to deter, de-escalate, and document encounters like these. And it is actually pretty successful. If we were not around, then the shepherd who might be trying to graze on their own could be much more vulnerable to being actually kidnapped by a settler or multiple settlers like this. And again, driven to an army outpost, beaten, not released for hours, days, who knows. And that also did happen while we were there to people who were on their own, who didn't have protective presence. So in a way, it's a good thing that the settler is directing his anger towards us as the protective presence activists rather than an isolated and vulnerable Palestinian person. I mean, they're not necessarily isolated, like they also, Palestinian families support each other, and a lot of them kind of like on the phone with each other while they're grazing, kind of like I might be on the phone with a friend while I'm walking to my car in an area that I feel a little weirded out about, you know. So, but thankfully, Protective Presence also does add an extra layer of safety. And at the same time, it was scary for me because when you see, like, this guy popped out of the tree, so we didn't see him coming. But in other times, it's a desert landscape, you can see for quite a long ways. So when you just see one or two armed men kind of like marching, striding towards you with purpose while you're out shepherding with a family, you don't know if it's going to be a calm confrontation or encounter, a calm encounter, or a really escalated confrontation. So there's like certainly a vigilance that happens with the nervous system after a few weeks of that. Try to go to the next one. Okay. And as well as the pain of Protective Presence, there was also a great deal of beauty that we were really privileged and honored to experience. That's in the same valley where Rafiq and Taufik and their families are living. So I experienced being hosted with incredible generosity and grace, eating fresh baked bread pretty much every day that people make in their home ovens called taboon, eating olives that usually they grew themselves, olive oil that they have made from their trees. Sweet tea was served to us everywhere we went, just incredible generosity and hospitality from all the families who hosted us. We got to spend a lot of time with kids. I was tempted to put a lot more footage or, images and videos of us having a great time with kids, playing soccer, dancing, all this stuff. But again, as I mentioned before, just to err on the side of caution, I'm trying not to share the images or identities, of people, especially kids. But there was a lot of beauty, a lot of sweetness, and some small victories. So we weren't present for this happening, but there was a shepherd who was able to plow and till their fields during this key winter season when the soil is softened by the rains. It's a really important time to be able to plow. And after being prevented for 2 months, he finally was able to plow. So that was a great experience. We were with a shepherd who was able to graze his sheep and goats at a farther radius from his house than he had been able to since last July, so even before October. And it's just those little moments when he's excited, and you can see it in his face, and he's talking to some of our fellow activists who speak Arabic, and they're saying, yeah, we haven't been able to come this far since last July. And it feels really good to be part of a group that's able to accomplish that. And this was one of the most meaningful victories. Sorry. So we were invited to stay overnight with a family who were spending their very first night back in their house after being chased away by settlers in October. So they had remained in the area, but they weren't sure it was safe enough to come and actually sleep there again. You can see the settlers kind of trashed the place a little bit, but their olive tree is still standing in their yard. And it was very incredible to feel that we could support them in being so brave to come back and insist on staying in their house, even under so much terrorism. So again, we visited this before earlier, but I love this quote: solidarity is the tenderness of the people of the world. I really feel so much tenderness in the solidarity that has been woven by many families, Palestinian families. Shout out to Nasser, who's kind of a leader of and founder of a network of protective presence in Masafer Yatta decades ago. Nasser conceived of the idea of protective presence, built relationship with Israeli activists as well as internationals. There's also intergenerationally, like his son is now kind of an activist in the Palestinian community there, Basel. And we are also so indebted to the Israeli activists and organizers, some of whom have been doing protective presence for more than 20 years. So we got to stay with people like in their 50s or 60s who have been coming to these rural areas for over 20 years, just with devotion, with solidarity and tenderness. Other Israelis who were there were young, and they were maybe members of Mesarvot, which is a group where people refuse service in the Israeli forces. And instead they came out here to do some protective presence. So they really helped to integrate us into the community of activists. And I want to just shout out the Center for Jewish Nonviolence. They were the group that really helped us to get there and helped us to plug in. I really encourage, if you're at all interested in exploring doing some protective presence in the West Bank, the Center for Jewish Nonviolence is a consistent presence in conversation with Palestinian families about their changing needs. So they adapt their programming based on the needs and wishes of the Palestinians. And they do regular programming each year. So they normally have a larger group that stays for 3 or 4 months. It actually just started this month during the shepherding grazing season, which, as I mentioned, is very key for the livelihood of shepherding families. So they'll stay for 3 or 4 months during the shepherding season. And then they also organize a program that goes during olive harvest in the fall. So just deep gratitude to the Center for Jewish Nonviolence for helping us to go, and also major shout outs to Tayush and All That's Left, and International Solidarity Movement, and other groups of Israelis and internationals that are cooperating to do this work, to keep it going, because it's really wanted and needed. I don't remember why I put this, but it's me with a cat, and I'm obsessed with cats. And this cat was purring, and I think it was just to say, like, oh, right. It's like, was it worth it? You know, was this experience, in my tiny, humble opinion, worth it? And I definitely think yes. And even as you see me getting choked up and sad about the situation there, because it feels very, very overwhelming and very daunting. It's these moments of presence with other beings, as nature, with other parts of nature, that really help me to continue to ground. So I think let's open it up for any questions. If there's a part that you'd like me to go into more in depth, or a part that I missed that you're really curious about, or if you have knowledge that, you know, that's relevant that I missed about, specifically about protective presence in Masafer Yatta, just welcoming that in as well. Thank you again so much for your kind attention. I really appreciate it.
Dear Katie, thank you so, so, so much. Wow. Wow. It's just, my body is like vibrating from all of this. It's just a lot. And you know, putting yourself out there is so inspiring and also scary for me to think about. We have a question that came directly to me from Bea that wanted to know if you could say a bit more about who the settlers are. Are they Israelis from Israel, or are they Jewish people who are invited from the government of Israel to come and live in occupied land? She says, I'm just trying to understand how aware they are of the context.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I will start by saying that I am not an expert on who the settlers are. Um, I can say that from what I know, a lot of, excuse me, a lot of settlers are ultra Orthodox folks who have a a strong desire to live on that particular land. Um, so it's more ideological, perhaps, for them. Others are maybe just lower income. We heard from Israeli folks and Israeli activists that sometimes the government sort of subsidizes or offers cheaper housing options for lower income people to live in the settlements. So it might be attractive for people who are like recently immigrated to Israel, can't afford a house or rent in some of the more expensive areas. There's also a program called Hilltop Youth that we heard about, which, as I understood it, is like if young Israeli citizens kind of get into trouble with the law, they might be sent to live in a settler community, kind of as community service, and also to sort of supposedly straighten them out in a patriotic way. But despite being illegal in the eyes of international law, these settlements are all not legal according to international law. They are very much supported by the current Israeli governmental leadership. Um, as I mentioned, one of the ministers of security lives in the West Bank in Palestine, distributes automatic weapons to other settlers. And at the point of having 700,000, up to 700,000 settlers living there, and it just keeps expanding. I mean, we saw incredible, like, fancy construction of roads specifically for settlers into settlements, like really intentional ways that the settlements themselves are designed to kind of cut off Palestinian villages from each other. Like it's not designed to optimize social connection among the homes. It's like stretched along a ridge in a very awkward way, but like specifically to break up the continuity of Palestinian lands. So I'm sorry I can't say, I don't know more than that, but I definitely did get the sense that there is like a right, at least the settlers who were confronting us or who were attacking Palestinian families that we were with, there was a deep sense of righteousness, and they're there on purpose. Like they didn't just like accidentally end up in the West Bank because they didn't know where they were, you know? Thanks for that question.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat. What kind of training were you given before you went?
Hmm. Thank you. So we were given a bit of training and briefing from the Center for Jewish Nonviolence. And normally they would do a much longer training process for their long-term activists who are there for 3 or 4 months. They managed to condense it a bit, partly because the situation has gotten so much worse in terms of settler attacks since October 7th. Like before October 7th, it wasn't necessarily normal for families to want overnight presence. They might just want shepherding accompaniment. But since October 7th, it's been like more and more families are signing up and requesting overnight presence and shepherding presence during the day. And rapid response, those being the 3 roles that I mentioned. I really encourage you to check out CJNV, like sign up for their newsletter. You can also check out the International Solidarity Movement if you want, which has rolling ongoing trainings they're geared towards international folks. I'm making an assumption that you're not Palestinian living already in Israel or the West Bank, or that you're not Israeli either. So I would encourage you to check out CJNV and ISM to find out more about the trainings that they're offering. I will say just one more word about that is that I think Whaley and I both found that our contemplative and trauma-informed spiritual practices and somatic practices have really helped us both during and after this experience. So we got some embodied training that helped us to prepare, and also indebted to political training from Palestinian folks of the diaspora, as well as co-resistors who are Israeli and also international. So appreciate that training as well.
Thank you. We have another request in the chat. Will you please talk about backlash safety issues once back at home, if any?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been back at home for a week and a half, so I don't really know yet. And I want to, again, I mentioned at the beginning of tonight that I have a thick stack of privileges that helped me to make the decision to go do protective presence. I don't think it's necessarily for everybody. And one of the reasons for that is because some people might be more vulnerable to backlash when they come home, or like their job might not give them leave to be able to go, or if it's discovered why they're going, their job might fire them or something like that. So the type of backlash that one might encounter, I think, is a little bit specific to each person. I will say that at the present moment, because in part of my thick stack of privileges, I am more worried about backlash towards the Palestinian families that I was with and towards the protective presence activists in general, which is why, as I mentioned, I didn't really show a lot of Palestinian people's faces. Like, I wasn't really even there as a journalist. I was there to kind of be a protective body. So to be determined what the backlash could look like. But I just want to honor the pain of that question. I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting, but it's sad to me that we have to consider that there could be backlash for doing something nonviolent like protective presence. Like, it just makes me sad. But thank you for that question. It's very real.
Annie, bowing in, that question actually makes me think about also the difficulty in expressing the desire as someone who's nonviolent, or a community that wants nonviolence, to ask for a ceasefire, and that even feels like it's getting backlash. And I find that really difficult too. And yeah, and feeling unsure how to express oneself when in this kind of environment. And I don't know if other people feel that way, but I'd like to put that out there. Maybe you've thoughts about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Annie. Yes, right. There can be risks involved in taking all kinds of actions, from where you live, to going overseas and trying to put your body in the way of the violence. I really bow to everybody who's taking risks bravely for what it is that matters to you, for the form of solidarity that matters to you, for the form of liberation that matters to you. Building our courage together is a big passion of mine. And you're right, Annie, it does involve risk, even sometimes to ask for a ceasefire at this moment. Tomorrow, I want to just shout out, like, if you're interested in more of that angle on what does it mean to build our courage to take the risks that we personally feel called to take in this moment, I'm going to be giving a talk tomorrow that's more focusing on that angle of building courage. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. It's a link to the Facebook page or Facebook post of my dear friend, Reverend Kevin Ross. And he's hosting me at the Harvard Divinity School to have to be part of a conversation series on public courage. So if that, again, is an angle that you're interested in, like, how do we take the risks that we feel called to take, then we can jam out about that a little bit more tomorrow.
Thank you, Katie. And there's another question. Were you able to meet with any Israeli-Palestinian peace group while there?
Great question. I think it partly depends on what you mean by peace. I mean, I would consider the Palestinian communities that are organizing for their own protection, as well as the Israeli activists. I mentioned All That's Left, Hayush, there's also Free Jerusalem, other groups. I would consider them pro-peace, but they're also, at least the Israeli activists we were with, are pretty explicitly anti-occupation, which is not a stance that every peace group takes necessarily. I will mention, and maybe we can put this link in the chat again, if it's okay. There's a super cool group that we met with, thanks to some friends here in occupied Turtle Island, that's called Anar, which is Palestinian-led and based in Bethlehem, and offers trauma support to Palestinian children throughout the West Bank, as well as caregivers to children. And they have a super rad, like, decentralized community empowerment model that we were really inspired by. So I very much encourage, if you're interested, if those words, you know, sing to you of like, ooh, trauma support for Palestinian children and their caregivers. Super impressed by their, like, long-term devoted vision, including supporting children who have been incarcerated, like children who have been detained or abducted by the Israeli army. So Anar, I don't know if we can get that. I think I can find the link up. Here we go. Do, do, do. Sweet, sweet, sweet. There we go. I see a couple more questions.
Yes, I was going to read maybe this. I don't know. We're 15 minutes from the finish, so you decide when you wanna stop. But the next one is, if we cannot actually do this ourselves or go to the area, how can we help make other people in this country understand what is going on? Since the reality of depression in the West Bank is definitely not understood in this country. Perhaps there are other resources.
Yes. Yes, wonderful. We have a whole bouquet of resources that we offered to everybody who signed up for this talk. I'm gonna see if I can paste them. Oh, that doesn't look very good. Annie or Adriana, maybe you could paste them one by one.
Oh, okay.
Or whatever, in whatever way works for you, but for me it's turning into a jumble. So yes.
And just a quick reminder, after this call, you will receive an email. We can maybe put all the resources together and share it with you all.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. So one of those resources is a free video documentary called The Law and the Prophet that's freely available to watch on YouTube that I think does a really good job of illustrating the situation in the West Bank. There are also articles in there by, like, there's an article on anti-Semitism from an Israeli-born Jewish woman named Miki Kashtan, who's in voluntary exile from Israel. That's really deep and powerful and beautiful. If you want to kind of go into the deep roots of this issue. There also has been, the West Bank has been in the news lately, like more of the mainstream media. So there's a longer article in New York Times Magazine about the escalating violence in the West Bank. It came out recently. Biden's administration is issuing some pretty small sanctions to like individual Israeli settlers who also have US citizenship or US financial assets. So you can check the news on that. So I think there's more and more mainstream news and information is coming out about what the situation is like in the West Bank that you can share. And yeah, we'll do our best to share with you the resources that we have. Oh, I know. I'm also gonna drop the links to the 2 articles that I showed. One is by a fellow protected presence activist who was there at the same time as we were. So that's the one I just posted through theconversation.com. And then there's this article written by a man who lives in Al-Khair named Auda. And it was actually written before October 7th, and the situation was already bad.
So, Annie bowing in, there's a question there, which is, kind of the $10 million question. What do you recommend to us as activities we can do right now to make Israel stop what they do right now, especially the bombing of Gaza? Bowing out.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to honor or just resonate with the intention of that question, the sense of powerlessness that I have sometimes felt, and many of us, I think, are feeling. Even as somebody who got to go, I mean, I went to the West Bank in part because there was no way I could go to Gaza, but I might have if there were a way that I could try to stop it. But I sort of hear the like fervor, or what I imagine is a fervor under that question. How can we make Israel stop what they're doing right now, especially the bombing of Gaza? And I really wish I had an answer for that. I think it's important for each of us to continue to pay attention and pay attention to where our bodies and spirits and ancestors are calling us to do brave work. And for me, and this isn't true for everybody, but for me, I feel good about being in alignment with my purpose, even if it's not immediately successful. So in Buddhism, we have 4 vows. I really like the translation from Plum Village and Thich Nhat Hanh's Order of Interbeing. The first 2 of the vows go, however innumerable beings are, I vow to meet them with kindness and interest. However inexhaustible the states of suffering are, I vow to touch them with patience and love. So for me, I think about that in our solidarity and our activism. We might not see the stopping of bombing of Gaza as quickly as we wish, and we might not see the end of the occupation of Palestine as quickly as we wish, or the end of state terrorism as quickly as we wish, the coming of peace and justice and love as quickly as we'd wish or within our lifetimes. But beings are innumerable and states of suffering are inexhaustible, and we got to help each other continue to maintain our devotion. Or at least that's what I want to do. It's up to you. But I find it very vulnerable to hold both a desire for efficacy of our actions and the devotion to our convictions, regardless of immediate, apparent, evident efficacy. Hope that makes sense. That said, plug in where you are, find out, follow your intuition, follow your heart, follow your mind and your political education towards leaders that you trust, and especially Palestinian folks, and especially folks from Gaza, if that's where you feel specifically called. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I do want to shout out, there are a couple of really cool drives to raise money for, this is not to stop Israel from bombing, but it is harm reduction, to raise money for eSIMs. So this is what allows Palestinians in Gaza to be able to operate their cell phones and stay in touch with folks. So I know there were some disabled activists like Alice Wong and Leah Lakshmi Pyapsna Samarasinha and others who put together some drives for folks internationally to be able to buy eSIMs for folks in Gaza, which seems really beautiful. And I've also been seeing an uptick in some fundraising drives to be able to evacuate folks, because I hear it's $14,000 per person or something to be able to evacuate. So people are trying to raise $100,000 to evacuate a family of 5. That's what I know, but if others know more, please feel welcome to put it in the chat.
We're coming close to the end of our time. I guess if there's any last things, maybe if anybody wanted to unmute and ask a question or share a gratitude or anything like that, this would be the time. Please do so.
Many thanks, Katie. This was an amazing, courageous presentation and set of hopeful, beautiful actions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wait, I for some reason couldn't see you, but it sounded kind of like Louise. Who was that?
Joanne from the
Joanne,
Washington.
oh, I see you now. Okay. Hi, Joanne. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming. Appreciate your time and attention. And Wei Li, my babe, is here, who is also there with me. I don't know if Wei Li, if you want to say anything or add anything.
Just so grateful that there's so many people who feel open to hearing about this. It's hard to receive, and it feels good to be in a community that cares. Thanks for doing this, putting this on.
Love you. Thanks, love. I also don't know if my parents are still here. If you are here, I'll be available for a phone call afterwards if there's anything you want to process. It might be some of the first time you saw some of those scary videos. I love you so much, and thank you for teaching me about solidarity.
Do your parents want to say anything?
I don't know. Mom, are you there? Let me try to find them. I think they don't have a camera. Let's see. I think maybe they dropped off or something, but I'll check in with them afterwards. Oh, I know, I see them. They're just muted. Try to ask to unmute. Oh well, anyway. Thank you so much. I'm seeing the love in the chat. It means a lot to me. If we know each other, I'm so open to your feedback. about how I can do even better at these kinds of report backs and sharing my experiences. So I think it really takes all of us as a community to be able to sustain this devotion to solidarity. And I see Louise Dunlap, I see Patricia Nakai. Shout out to Sarah Nahar and Jonathan Nahar for being the people who first taught me about protective presence and what it even was. And I see Coco on here. I saw Eddie earlier, Amanda Ream, Jenny Chu. So many dear friends who've taught me so much and helped to keep my heart safe, even in scary situations. Erin Goggins, oh my God. Erin, if you're still here, thank you for all your love and support in this process. Yeah, hi. Hi, hun. Ah, good to see you.
Katie, this is so nourishing for all of us. You can see by what people are putting in the chat. As I was saying earlier, we need this kind of people who are showing the way of what we can actually do and not just feel helpless all the time, but to actually see someone who made an effort and went and was able to make a difference. Because not just there, but anywhere, there are places we can make these small differences. And thank you so much for offering this gift of that kind of nourishment tonight. I needed it, and I think a lot of us needed it. So thank you. Thank you so much. And I don't know if Adriana, you want to say anything else?
Yes, thank you so much, Katie. This has been amazing. And it's saying, just witnesses the courage of someone who took a step forward and were there, doing it with your presence. It's amazing. But I just want to say also that someone asked if you're seeing someone else doing this kind of work in other parts of the world. And I want to acknowledge all the people who's doing that kind of work here with migrants, showing there from them. And I think that's something that we all have available here in this country, happening in our backyards. So using our presence, using our privilege just to be there in a peaceful way with our presence, it's always helpful. Witnessing conversations that are diminishing others and othering people, it's an amazing way to have a protective presence with policing, with Black people in this country. So I think there are ways in this country. You don't have to move further, maybe in your own block, you can be protective presence. So thank you so much, Katie. And thanks to everyone for being here.
Thank you so much for saying that, Adriana. I really appreciate it. Yes, and right, someone just asked in the chat, and if there are organizations that you love that are doing protective presence work for migrant communities, would love to know about them. Shout out to any group that trains on Cop Watch. I got training in that years ago, and I found some of those skills really helpful and transferable to the West Bank. And I also want to say, there's a nuanced conversation to be had about, again, what kinds of stack of privileges make us more or less able to do protective presence. I've gotten questions from Palestinian folks in the US being should I go do protective presence in the West Bank, or am I going to be a liability? What's the deal? Am I going to be safe? Are the people I'm with going to be less safe because of me? Also, dark-skinned folks might have a harder time encountering any kind of white supremacy or, police violence in general, whether here in the US or abroad. So I'm so here for the nuance. Both, thank you so much for naming the ways that protective presence can happen right here, and continuing to be nuanced about being in conversation around who gets to do protective presence and in what ways, right?
Wow. Well, shall we have a final bell, and then we can stay on and say goodbye after that?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just coming back into our bodies and our breath. Breathing in. I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out. I know I'm breathing out. I breathe in and out for all beings everywhere, so that we can find a way for healing and safety and well-being and freedom for all. Thank you all for staying on and spending